My name is Valentine. I'm an independent art curator and writer based in Cambodia. I worked as a staff writer and contributing editor for San Francisco Arts Quarterly, staff writer for Hyperallergic, and right now I'm a public programming coordinator for Sasa Basak in Phnom Penh. I've written and spoken for a lot of places like South by Southwest, Salon, Vice, SF MoMA, and more. Today I'm going to talk a little about Southeast Asia and alternative spaces in Southeast Asia. Should I speak more into the mic? Okay. This is Southeast Asia. I'm going to talk about a space in Vietnam in the purple, a space in Cambodia in the brown, and a space in Myanmar. What I really want to emphasize right up front is that you should not think that this talk is like a summary of Southeast Asia, that like my 3 years researching in Southeast Asia can summarize an area half the size of the United States with about twice as many people, with 11 countries and 14 different official languages and many more. It's a super complex and very fascinating region that I definitely can't summarize in the next 25 minutes, and I'm not going to try. So I'm just going to talk about some things that I'm seeing and 3 specific places. In the West, we really deeply value these freedoms that we cherish, these ideas of voting, of protest, of free speech, and I believe rightfully so. I really value those ideals. But in many places in the world, many of the countries, in the 3 countries I'm talking about, those ideals aren't really as possible, they're not as respected, and they're met often with violent opposition. And where there is no free press, speech, or assembly, where there's poor education or lack of infrastructure, I believe there's a really important need to promulgate new ways of thinking, of being in society. And as an outsider looking at this region before I came, I was first looking at the media that was coming out, particularly online. I used to work for the Civic Beat under An Xiaomina, who studies memes, political memes, specifically in China. And so these are remixes of the Tank Man, the famous Tank Man photograph of Tiananmen Square in 1989. So in China, super oppressive government, super controlled, tightly controlled media environment. You can't share images of Tank Man, you can't talk about Tiananmen Square, or you don't see it in the mainstream media. So people online started remixing the photos so that it would get past the censors for a little bit. They put these rubber duckies in, they put this llama in, and there's these really long, really intricate stories about these memes that I could talk for an hour about. But this is kind of something that I was fascinated. How are people getting around censorship? How are people getting to the conversations that they found important, political conversations online, and using media to do that? Because I believe that art and creativity can and should work to build new ways of thinking and being in society. And what's most important here, because I was working in New York City for a really wealthy artist who was represented by Pace Gallery, and I was installing art in like Midtown Manhattan, and I had to take the service elevator because I wasn't allowed to go into the front door. And that kind of became the art world for me. And so I really pushed back on this idea of the white cube, which is the illusion or the facade that art exists in this neutral space, kind of exists separate from society in some way. And I think it's a failure to realize the potential of art, and it's also a failure of kind of a predominantly art market focused understanding or existence of art. So with this humor, with these medias, I was really excited to see art going beyond that into society, into everyday context, and pushing the context of what can and could be talked about. So I went to Southeast Asia 3 years ago and started Asia, and then mostly Southeast Asia, to study it. And when looking at this type of media, I started thinking about it in terms of citizens media. And this is a term coined by Clemencia Rodriguez, who's a professor of sociology at the University of Oklahoma. And she studies media in conflict regions, in Colombia particularly. And Rodriguez says that while overtly activist content is important, the actual process of connecting with your community, your local culture, of finding your own voice, and creating spaces in which people, everyday people, can speak and be heard, that this is the real power of media, and that's citizens' media. And she says that it's not effective at persuading people. It's not effective at, like, the protest sign, like, we demand this. It's not very good at doing that. But what it is doing, what it is valuable for, is creating or enacting the desired changes. It's kind of saying, this is the society we want, and start doing that. So it's a community of people around media that use media as a way to show what they want to be, to enact it. And I believe that's really powerful. And I was wondering, my theory was that these memes, maybe these memes were doing that this was a confluence and a conversation that people used as a way to start building a more civic society. But when I got to Southeast Asia, that's me, and I started interviewing, I tried to just meet as many activists and artists and kind of journalists, anyone that was kind of like lefty, alternative people. I was just like, can we have coffee? I'll buy you a cup of coffee. It's 50 cents, like, I'll have a lot of coffee. And what I found was, one, the majority of people are not online, which kind of ruined my theory. And two, that if they are online, or if they do have access to these books or something, they're not reading them, they don't understand them due to lack of education, due to lack of a social understanding of what that might look like. Or they disagree due to, like, social norms, or for a myriad of reasons. And so I started kind of being like, okay, I have to rethink this, and pushed back and was like, so how did you start thinking about art? How did you start thinking differently about society, about your government? What was the thing that got you to here? And time again, people started mentioning spaces like this. And this is Ten Cafe in Hue, Vietnam, which is in central Vietnam. And this is like an art space. It's a cafe run by the owner, Nguyen Tuân, who's on the right with a cigarette. And he's an artist, and there's art on the wall. And they have workshops, they have events, but it's just kind of invite-only, calling friends, and it's mostly a cafe for kind of young artists. And people would enter these spaces not as a convert. They're like, I don't know what art is, I don't know what they're doing over there, but it looks like young and like cool people, and I want to go have a good cup of coffee, so why not? So I found these spaces to be very generative. This is another one, Samaki, in Battambang, where I worked for a while. And I want to call these spaces alternative art spaces. And the art there, maybe I should just drop it, but they're creative spaces where alternative ways of being and thinking are taken seriously. And I found them more enabling or generative to a greater public than spaces focused solely on media or solely on art, like as capitalized art, world art. And so, for instance, Samaki, we were trying really to connect with just everyday people and the people in the community around us. And we saw that most people didn't really care or understand the art that I studied. And what we started doing is just having these really fun events. We taught meditation classes. We had drawing workshops. This is a concert of Yun Yon, who later became rather famous. And we tried to just be an active space where kids could be creative and fill in this. The alternative here is filling in a really poor education system that doesn't allow for kind of creativity. It's all rote learning. So the first space I'm going to focus on is San Art, and San means platform in Vietnamese. And it's in Ho Chi Minh or Saigon, and it's had, until very recently, a very huge regional residency program that was entirely funded. And really the best artists, in my opinion, and pretty much high art artists, got residencies here, and they would spend 6 months fully funded in Ho Chi Minh, and they would be been given a reading partner to connect with, and they'd have a little show. It's a small space with this reading room, and this reading room, like most of these books, are actually like illegal to have in Vietnam. And if they're not illegal, they're very hard to get. And if I cannot order books to be sent to me in like Amazon, just like won't do it, or it's prohibitively expensive. So every time I come back to the United States, people are asking like, can you bring this book or bring, which they're big art heavy books, so they're kind of annoying. But and they do these little curatorial projects. But most importantly, it's this really informal community. Because of the legal restrictions for meeting, you can't have more than, I think, 6 people meet in Vietnam without legal permission, without applying for that. So this group right here, we'd have to write to the Ministry of Culture and say, we're going to do this, talk about this, and like we're planning on inviting these people, and here are their bios. And the Ministry of Culture, who doesn't understand art, did not learn about art, has to say yes or no. So what they do is they're like, this isn't an art show, it's a private gathering and we're like having dinner. It's a dinner party. We're not having an art show, we're showing things from our archive. So there's all these little tricks that people are doing to get around that. But San art has kind of increasingly been more and more censored. They're kind of known for the most radical work in southern Vietnam. And so the government's kind of figured out what they're doing to get around the censorship. And so now it's pretty much informal discussion groups is how San art exists. The residency's been shut down entirely. So it's just, they've really focused on pretty much everything besides the media, besides the art. Like how can we continue conversations within this oppressive government? Next is Thuye'dan Village Art Project in Myanmar. And Thuye'dan is a village where An Co is from, and his wife Nga Le is from Yangon. It does community-based kind of art projects, kind of happenings, kind of workshops, something. They do a lot of performances, and it's for legal reasons. Until very recently, Myanmar was one of the most oppressive, least-free governments in the world, and definitely in Southeast Asia. That's changing really fast, but it's unclear how much. But basically, Nga Le and An Co graduated from art school, and they believed that art had value for society, but they could not do it in Yangon. If they did the art that they were doing here, they would totally be arrested and in jail, absolutely. And they tried kind of San art's idea of like having informal discussion groups, and the police started being parked out in front of their house watching them. And they like chose not to do like the gallery route, like and try for permits. They're just like, we're having a dinner party. And that got them surveilled. So they kind of just left the city, and for several years, they just performed in a forest by themselves with no audience, which I find like really incredible. Every young artist and curator today like wants the show and wants the documentation, and like we thrive off of that. And they're just like, well, it matters to us, and we want to make the best art we can, and the only place we can do that is in a forest. So there's this entire practice that's lost. But what they figured out is An Co's from this tiny little village, and he knows everyone there, and they all know him. And he shows up and says, like, I want to build a bike, but I want the bike to not really work or like look crazy. And people are like, sure, like whatever, and he just starts squawking around asking if anyone has like bike parts. And then he hires some local crafts guy to like weld these things together, and all the time working with kids. And he uses, his entire practice uses kind of modes of transportation, of getting your body somewhere else that are all kind of broken or not functional or almost functional, as a way to talk about kind of Burmese or Myanmar, their progress, their aspirations. Because he always talks about like the people are there, the desire is there, but the system is kind of stacked against us. And so he has these really interesting conversations with children about like, where would you go if this was a plane? Where are we trying to go as a village? What's important to us? While they're just sitting there like fiddling with this crazy bike. And he did this from 2008 to 10, adding on to this bike and making all these other ones, and making several other like broken ladders, and a cart. So that kind of becomes the substance of the pieces, these informal discussions with kids that I think I need to go to this village, which hopefully I legally can go in the next couple of years, but and see how that's going, kind of test what he's saying. But I think that that's really valuable. And again, it's kind of everything except the art context. And here's him sitting with a group of kids doing painting.
Yeah. The last space is Bayman, which is in Battambang, Cambodia. And Bayman is a type of naturally occurring kind of traditional glue that's extremely sticky, and so and it's kind of hard to call it an art space. It's a film, animation, photography, like image group of people, and it's 100% volunteer run. It's 100% Khmer. It's entirely self-supporting, and they're reacting to, Cambodia has one of the largest instances of nonprofits in Southeast Asia. And there's this really big problem of people like, well, I'm waiting for the nonprofit to like do it. Someone said that they might build a school, so I'm just gonna wait until that school appears and then not do anything. And they're like, this is all on us. We're not getting it, and they refuse money. Not that they're getting tons of offers, but they bought all their cameras collectively, and they have like 3 and about 60 kids sharing these cameras. So they meet for free at Wat Thuye'dan in Battambang, and the Wat just said, like, that sounds like a cool project. You can meet here Saturdays and Sunday mornings, like 60 kids, ranging from like that guy, it's like 5 or something, to like 30 years old. And somebody in the group is like, I have an idea for a music video. And they're like, great. And they kind of vote on it, and they're like, yeah, let's do that. And then they break into groups, and the kid who has been there the longest in each group directs the group, whether or not that is like a girl or a boy, whether or not that is the youngest boy or the oldest boy. It's the person who's been committed to that group the longest is the director. And everyone is respected, and this girl is like there, and this is the script writing group, and she's there like, let's the next scene, we should do this, and it's great, it's fantastic, and this is Sunday morning unpaid like labor.
Is that all legal and condemned?
So in Cambodia, the government has really good laws. The United Nations made Cambodia's laws in 1993. The executive branch doesn't care about those laws at all and never follows them. But no, they follow them until it becomes a problem. And so if this group started becoming like an activist group, it would be a problem. And they would make up something where it's a problem. Until they're just now floating a law that it will change that, and everyone's worried about it, because Cambodia has kind of been this little sphere where the government has not cared one bit about the arts. And we're always like, please don't tell the government that arts is like important. And it seems like it's gonna change really soon, which sucks. So I think the idea of citizens media as something that comes authentically from the community is something that Bayman, I think, is really exciting to think about. And you always go, like every time tourists go abroad to like poor countries, they bring back these photos with like the poor kid, And I really love this kid who was just, every time I looked over my shoulder, like he was just photographing me. And he was in the like photo club and was learning how to frame a shot. And I was clearly his subject for the day. And I was thinking about this, if like, Cambodia has a lot of people like me who come and write the stories. Like most of the journalists are foreigners. And I try really hard to be responsible to that, but it is very hard to do that role. And Bayman, I see in Bayman a chance for them to create their own journalists, to tell their own stories that come authentically from their communities. And kind of this idea of citizens media, that when it comes from a collective, it can be more accurate, more
honest to the community. And also in terms of, I always think about the foreign journalist problem, but the biggest issue is the government that's super corrupt, that just doesn't care about these people. So I hope that with more Baymans, with more people documenting, with more people photographing, that these poor, not wealthy, like kids can be heard in a way. And Clemencia Rodriguez's assertion, which is really hard to prove, is that this type of media, citizens media, eventually leads to a more engaged social sphere. And I believe that this is proof, that Bayman is proof. So they started out this film, photo, animation club. And somebody proposes that we want to talk about the degradation of the environment in Cambodia, which is super bad. And they start making this film about what's going on, the deforestation, that's really a big problem there. And they keep on being like, we should do something. We can't just write about it. We can't just make this video. And so they started going out. They found this guy who was looking for volunteers in a little national park, like an hour outside of Battambang. And at like 5 a.m., they all get up, like 3 people on a little motorcycle, and with their own gas, their own motorcycles, go out and just in like 100-degree weather, volunteer. And I went with them, and it was so exhausting. But it was like, they said, this is for us, this is our country, this is our community, we have to do something. And so they film, they document, but they also do. And I think that's the exciting next step that's potential. And finally, what's so exciting about these spaces, I think, is how inclusive they are and how anyone can kind of stumble in, especially the coffee shops. This is another space, and that's me sitting down with a group of foreigners around the translator. And around us this is a low-income housing project in Phnom Penh that has an art space. So there's monks, there's this little group of foreigners, there's all these kids that are very low-income kids, and like standing in the back and sitting up front are a bunch of artists, and we're all engaging in this big discussion forum that was going on. And I think it's very rare to see this type of diversity in one place, and I think it's incredibly enabling. And as walls and political rhetoric come up around the world, especially now, learning how to be with each other, be creative with each other, and be in collaboration with each other, I think is one of the great things these spaces have to offer. And I think the whole world, not just Southeast Asia, needs that. Thanks. That's all.